So, feel free to close your eyes with me. And I want us first to begin to start feeling our body, placing our attention on our body. Simply becoming aware of it, open to it on the body's own terms. We might also become aware of what the body may be feeling, opening to it on feelings' own terms. And place our attention on our thoughts, open to them on thoughts' own terms. We're not so interested in creating any particular experience, any particular way of thinking, any particular way of feeling, or even sitting. But just simply becoming aware of or opening to that which is already happening. Now, let's call to our mind an experience that maybe we've had, whether it be ourself or of another, in which there was a disagreement. And in this disagreement, the nature of disagreeing is to have one perspective that is in seeming opposition or opposing to another perspective. And this creates a conflict where two people are convinced that things can only be one way. And clearly, I'm not wrong, so the way you know must be wrong. This can be a pretty typical type of conflictual experience. And subsequently, the feeling that can begin to pervade our body would oftentimes be referred to as less than desirable. Anger, frustration, resentment, whatever the case may be, start to boil up and really create a state of dis-ease within our whole system. But what if a consideration could change that experience for ourselves, where conflict in that way wasn't needed anymore? What if this consideration was the understanding of how two opposing ideas could be equally true? And in this scenario that perhaps you've called to your mind of a time in history when yourself and another were in a conflictual conversation. Perhaps we can first look at ourselves within that experience and see how our perspective was formulated. Our perspective, in which we're using in this present moment conflict situation, was created due to very specific experiences earlier in our life. Could have been conditioning at childhood. Could have been trauma worked through or not worked through yet. It could have been goals we've had, successes that created specific perspectives on values, on what was seen as undesirable. And through all of these past experiences, formulated in the present time a particular perspective that was held, that in the present time was creating a conflictual conversation with someone. Now, if that is also true, this present perspective you're holding is only a result, only even there, or you could even know a perspective due to all of your very unique and individualized past experiences, then that would also be true for the other. And so we can take a moment to even imagine this other person in this past conflictual experience that you may have had, what life experiences they had to have went through in order to formulate the particular perspective that they have today. What conditioning, what traumas worked through or not worked through, what successes, where they flourished, and as such created particular goals and priorities and values in which they see the world through today. How could that be wrong? It is simply a matter of having had life experiences. Perspective is simply an automatic result of having lived a life. How could that be wrong? Now, what this requires us to do, though, is to develop a new skill that oftentimes might not yet be had. And this new skill that a situation like this is beckoning us to deepen, at least, is the skill of holding two seemingly opposing perspectives in our mind simultaneously, and it not causing inner conflict within ourselves. Now, the capacity to hold two seeming conflicting perspectives in our mind simultaneously without causing inner conflict within ourselves is the skill that conflict is beckoning us to deepen. I'm going to say it one more time. The skill for holding two seemingly opposing perspectives in our mind simultaneously without causing inner conflict is the skill that conflictual conversations with people are beckoning us to deepen. And it deepens by just that. First, exploring how our own perspective may have been formulated. What particular life experiences was had that was unique in that it aided to create this particular perspective that we're holding in the present time, that we find ourselves in conflict with in relation to another. They too have had particular, very unique life experiences that, because of those very specific life experiences, have cultivated a particular perspective that in the present time they find themselves in conflict with you. Now, neither one of those, as we just spoke about, are as a result of simply having life experiences. Perspective is simply an automatic result of having had life experiences. And no two people have had exactly the same life experiences. So therefore, the odds of seeming opposing perspectives to encounter seeming opposing perspectives is great. And not yet having explored the capacity to hold two seemingly opposing ideas in our minds simultaneously, will, of course, be the nature of conflict, be the nature of a fight, be the nature of struggle within the relationships of those in our life. But the good thing is that these relationships are literally causing that deepening. They're causing us to really, when someone questions us, it causes us to really know what's true for us and why. And the moment we know what's true for us and why, we see that that's also true for them from their perspective. Now all of a sudden we've used a challenging, bad situation to deepen ourselves, to deepen this capacity to be able to hold two opposing perspectives in our mind simultaneously without causing inner conflict. And as such, we can feel safe where previously we felt threatened. Now, that was an example of a more exaggerated place where we might not feel safe. But on an even more subtle level, we might not feel safe in the fullest extent of the word in even seeming mundane situations. The fullest extent of safety can be what we might refer to as freely radiating, where there is no inner tensions in the body. There is no even subtle ways that the body is unconsciously or subconsciously holding back or resisting. But that every cell of our body is saying yes. Absolute safety to be myself. So to really explore absolute safety, we need to look at what's inside of us now instead of the external. What is internal that might be creating an environment of hostility? And we might explore this idea in a slightly different way by highlighting a tendency of our mind. And let's define this tendency as attaching ourselves to objects. Being or seeking out objects and in contrast to objects, completely overlooking space. The nature of our mind is to ignore certain parts of our experience in order to emphasize what might be important for us to know about our welfare and survival. For instance, we would want our attention to be drawn to movement in the brush. There was a tiger, or other objects of survival, perhaps food, and even what we need to be aware of in our own thinking, which could also be considered an object, what our thinking is telling us. And so this long-standing pattern in humanity to be drawn to objects in contrast to the space in which they exist is very deeply entrenched in all of us, and rightfully so. The challenge with this setup, however, is these objects are always moving. They're always changing. And so it requires us to constantly shuck and jive, to push and pull, and be manipulating our inner and outer world in order to create a sense of safety in relation to the objects. In relation to objects. We got to get our thoughts just right. We got to get our thoughts more positive. Those are objects. We've got to get our feelings just right. We've got to get the objects of our feelings more positive. We've got to get our body just right. We all have many thoughts about ways we would prefer our body to be, perhaps. We've got to get our relationship just right, another person just right, our job situation just right, money just right. We got to get the car, the home just right. Got to get the government just right. Got to get the world just right. And as important as all these things may be at a relative level, the exclusive focus on them may be what's inhibiting the safety that we're really wanting with by manipulating the objects in the world. So perhaps instead of the exclusive focus being on the objects, which are always changing and never consistent, we might begin to include the other half of the framework, which is the space that all of those objects are always held in. Just as in our analogy earlier, we learned that we couldn't have an exclusive focus on our perspective and exclude the perspective of another and expect to feel safe. We learned that we have to learn how both perspectives are equally true and equally valuable. And as such, we learn how to feel safe. We learn that there actually isn't an opposition. And similarly, this is also true within our experience moment to moment. Instead of it being in a battle between two individuals, it becomes a battle between objects, our thoughts, our emotions. Everything needs manipulated. Everything needs to be a particular way. But again, that's only half of the equation. What if that experience is beckoning us to take things just a little bit deeper? To include the other half of the equation of objects, which in contrast to objects is space. And in the inclusion of the other half, do we find that safety, that continuity, that familiarity in every experience, despite the arrangement of the objects that are present? So again, the capacity to hold two things in mind. Both the objects of our experience, the body, the world, our emotions, thoughts, any object, and the space in which the objects are held. This is the essence of meditation. In meditation, it is very natural for an object, such as a thought, to appear in the space of meditation, and the thought feel almost secondary, small even, in comparison to the largeness of this meditative space. So what we're learning here is to recognize this essence in meditation and begin to identify with it, see the value in it, the usefulness, how it can't be overlooked or disregarded or not even recognized as there if we are looking for the deeper experience of safety. If we're looking for a deeper experience in life, we have to include that which previously we didn't have a particular tendency to even recognize. Just as in our analogy, we had to learn to include the perspective of another, even though our tendency is to focus on our perspective exclusively at times. So here we're taking that even one step farther and creating a sense of safety moment by moment. By recognizing the detraction in the quality of life it would be to not include the perspective of another, to discount the perspective of another. Similarly, the detraction in the quality of life it would be moment to moment to exclude the other half of objects, which in contrast to objects is space. The space in which the the object is held. This way, we're not dependent on the objects being in any particular order, any particular fashion. We're not dependent on things in our life being a certain way in order to feel safe. Because we have the essence of safety, which is continuity, the continuity of space, which is familiarity, the familiarity of space. It's always there. It's always the same. In fact, you could even say it's prior to objects. You could say that without space, there could be no object. And once again, this is the essence of meditation. In meditation, the space of meditation becomes the priority. And any object that might be noticed in it is very small in comparison to the expansiveness of space. So we're just practicing to identify that for ourselves, to experience that directly for ourselves, and then begin to bring that understanding from our meditation into our daily life more and more. So don't forget what you witnessed here, whatever it may be, and it may very well be different for each of us. But begin to collect whatever you did witness. Begin to formulate a conclusion, a takeaway. Something that you can utilize in your days and weeks ahead. On your own personal path of deepening the experience of life, of feeling safe, of knowing yourself. And after you've formulated this takeaway, when you're ready, begin to bring your attention back to each other in the conversation. And when you're ready to do so, feel free to take in a deep breath and open your eyes. All right, guys, I would love to hear what anyone's experience was with their meditation. If anyone has anything to share at all.